Hi, welcome to Lesson 26, Session 3. Today we'll be continuing the work we've been doing on choosing units to solve word problems. The good news is that you guys have done such a fantastic job learning how to convert these measurements. And now you're taking it and you're putting it into these real life applicable situations that might actually happen to you. I'm not sure if the next question that we're going to solve will happen to you, but we'll let you be the judge. We're going to be working on Ready Classroom in our math workbook on pages 541 through 546. So go ahead and open up to page 541 now, and hopefully it doesn't gross you out too much like it did me. And here's why. Oh, it's gross. Oh, look at those worms. Oh, that's so gross. Anyway, let's go ahead and read the problem so we can get beyond these worms. And I think these worms kind of stick around with us for a while, so I hope they don't gross you out too much. All right, it says this. Heather and Diego measure worms from their class compost bin. Heather measures a 3.5 centimeter worm, and Diego measures a 28 millimeter worm. Which worm is longer? How much longer is the longer worm? And we need to remember that that 10 millimeters is equal to 1 centimeter. So like I said, I don't know if you make it a habit to go out and to find worms and to measure them and to have maybe with a friend where one of you measures in centimeters and one of you measures in millimeters, but you know what? It could happen. So let's see what this problem is that we're trying to solve. We are measuring worms. And what we want to know, there's actually two questions in this equation, or excuse me, in this problem. We have which worm is longer is the first question that we're being asked. And then the second question is how much longer is the longer worm? So we definitely have two things that we need to answer at the end of this problem. Now, what is the important information? Well, Heather measures a 3.5 centimeter worm. That's Heather's. And then Diego measures a 28 millimeter worm. So we are just trying to figure out which is longer, 3.5 centimeters or 28 millimeters. So the first thing we need to do to solve this, the very first thing we need to do is we need to choose a measurement. And let's get that focus for us. We need to choose a measurement. We need to decide if we are going to convert centimeters to millimeters or millimeters to centimeters. So, do you have a preference? Well, I think I would rather work with millimeters than centimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and choose millimeters. Like I mentioned before, you could solve it either way, but I'm going to go ahead and solve for millimeters. So I already know that Diego has a worm that is 28 millimeters. So since Diego's worm is already in millimeters, I don't need to change it because it's already in millimeters. Now, Heather's worm is not in millimeters. Heather's worm is in centimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and have to solve Heather's worm. I'm going to need to solve what Heather's worm is and convert my centimeters to millimeters. So if I'm converting centimeters to millimeters or centimeters to millimeters, am I going to divide or multiply? That's right. I'm going to multiply because you multiply when you go from a larger unit to a smaller unit. So I need to take Heather's 3 5/10 millimeters, centimeters, and multiply it times 10 because there are 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter. Then I'm going to I like to move my 3 5/10 all the way over. And then I have one digit after 10 in 10. So I'm going to move this decimal over one place value. So I know that Heather has a worm of 35 millimeters. So am I done? No, not yet. Can I tell which worm is longer? Yes, I can. Which worm is longer, 35 millimeters or 28 millimeters? That's right, 35 millimeters. So we are going to say that Heather's worm is longer. And so that solves the first problem, or for the first question. What's the second question? How much longer is the longer worm? So if we want to know how much longer 35 is than 28, what operation are we going to do? That's right, we're going to subtract. And if we have 35 and we subtract 28, let's figure out what that is. I cannot take 8 from 5, so I'm going to regroup. And 15 minus 8 is 7. 2 minus 2 is 0. So I can say that Heather's worm is 7 millimeters longer than Diego's worm. All right. So the first thing we did was we chose a measurement, and then we converted to that measurement, and then we solved the problem. And the ultimate problem was, how much longer is Heather's worm than Diego's? So we know her worm is longer, and we know it's 7 millimeters longer. Now, we could have solved it the other way around. And I actually already did that here, so I'm going to show you. So if you had chosen centimeters, then we would have first decided, all right, well, Heather's worm is already set 3.5 centimeters, so we don't need to convert it. Then we would have said, okay, well, Diego's worm is 28 millimeters. Now, when we're converting from a millimeter to a centimeter, we need to divide. So we divide 28 millimeters by 10 millimeters because there's 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter. And that we take that 28, we move it over here, and then we move our decimal 1 place value to the left. Remember, when we divide, we move the decimal to the left. And so we know that Diego's worm is 2.8 centimeters long, or 2 8/10 centimeters long. Now, is Heather's worm still longer than Diego's? Yes, her worm is still longer than Diego's. How much longer is her worm than Diego's? If we take our 3 5/10 centimeters and subtract 2 8/10 centimeters, we're going to get an answer of 7/10 of a centimeter. So Heather's worm is 7/10 of a centimeter longer than Diego's. So we actually, 7/10 of a centimeter and 7 millimeters are actually equivalent. They're the same size. So it didn't matter which way we did it. In this case, we got an answer in centimeters, and in this case, we got an answer in millimeters, but they both were correct. So as you're going through and doing these problems today, you're going to be choosing the method that's best for you, and you may very well get an answer that is different from your neighbor because you may have converted to a different measurement. But chances are you are both correct. Let's go ahead and go to the next page. All right, so on this page here, we are going to explore different ways to understand solving the problem by choosing a unit to convert. So we have the same problem below. And then the first, in picture it, it says you can use a picture to help you understand the relationship between centimeters and millimeters. So if you look at this ruler, at the top of this ruler, these the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, those tell you how many centimeters you have. And down below, the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 tell you how many millimeters you have. As you can tell, the 1 and the 10, the 2, the 20, 3, 30, 4, 45, 50, they all line up because 1 centimeter is the same as 10 millimeters. 2 centimeters is the same as 20 millimeters, and so on and so forth. So we could use this ruler to really help us to know what we're dealing with. But as you can see, it doesn't really matter whether we measure in centimeters or millimeters. We'll get a different value, but the two answers will be equivalent or equal. Now we can write equations to convert centimeters to millimeters or millimeters to centimeters, and I'll get that paper in a minute. When we convert centimeters to millimeters, we know that there are 10 millimeters in each centimeter. So we're going to take our total number of centimeters and multiply it by the number of millimeters in 1 millimeter to get 35 millimeters. So 3.5 centimeters is 35 millimeters. Or we could go the other way around and convert millimeters to centimeters. Now remember, when we're going from a smaller unit to a larger unit, we divide. So we start with our 28 millimeters, and then we divide it by 10 centimeters excuse me, 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter to get 2 8/10 centimeters. So either way, we can convert either one. It's really just going to be, it's going to depend on what is your best method. All right, so on this page, it says, why do you need to convert one of the units to measure, units of measure to solve the problem? Like, why do we even need to go to all that work? Why can't we just compare the two values? Well, we can't compare centimeters and millimeters because they are different units of measure. So if you're trying to compare two lengths of size, you really do have to have the same unit in order to figure out which one is longer. So you do have to make them into comparable units. So they have to be the same. Number 2, why do you multiply to convert centimeters to millimeters? So why is it that we multiply when we're converting from centimeters to millimeters? Now remember, I have been preaching this to you for the last 2 weeks. We multiply to convert a larger unit to a smaller unit. So don't forget, anytime you go from a larger unit to a smaller unit, you're going to multiply because there are 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter. So the centimeter is the larger unit. Now, conversely, why do you divide to convert millimeters to centimeters? So if you're going from millimeters to centimeters, we are going to divide. The reason we do that is because we divide to convert smaller units to larger units. That is nothing new. That's what we've been talking about for 2 weeks. Now, who measured the longer worm? How much longer was it? We solved this on the last page, so I'm going to go pretty quickly through that. We know that Heather had the longer worm. Her worm was 7 millimeters longer than Diego. Or we could also say that it was, I believe let me go back. Oh, it was, I lost that piece of paper. 7/10, that's what it was. Or 7/10 of a centimeter longer. So you could have gotten any of those answers, but if you look over here, 7/10 would be right about here. And that, or excuse me, 7/10 of a centimeter would be right about here. That would be 7/10. And this is 7 millimeters. So as you can see, they're both the same amount, but just one is millimeters and one is centimeters. All right, now if we're looking at the problem wording again, why can you give an answer in millimeters or centimeters? The problem doesn't ask us to answer in a specific unit, so we get to choose. That's the wonderful thing when the problem doesn't ask us to give our answer in a certain format. And now we're going to go ahead and do our reflection that we do at the end of each of our lessons. And so we're going to look at this and say, okay, so the strategy I like best is what? So do you prefer to convert from the larger unit to the smaller unit or the smaller unit to the larger unit? It really is just a preference, and it's really whether or not you prefer to multiply or divide. So go ahead and tell me which is your best method, and then tell me why. You can pause your video now and finish writing that, and then when you're done, you can go to page 544. All right, on page 544, we see 3 problems. So the first problem says this: Steve and Tom each build a box. Who builds a box with a greater volume? How much greater is the volume? So we've got a box, and we want to know 2 things. Who builds a box with a greater volume, and how much greater is the volume? And then the important information is actually not in the problem, it's over here in these pictures. And the important information is all of these sides. This is the information that we need in order to solve the problem. So here's what we're going to do. First of all, we need to remember what is the equation for volume? How do we find volume? Remember, volume equals length times width times height. That's asking you to remember all the way back to the first 3 weeks of school. But the first 3 weeks of school, we learned how to find the volume. So remember, the volume is the length times the width times the height. So we need to find the volume of this box and the volume of this box and decide which is better. Now, we can decide if we want to measure, we know we have this box is measured in feet and this box is measured in inches. So the first thing we need to do is we need to choose our unit. So do we want to convert these feet into inches or these inches into feet? And I'm going to tell you that I would prefer to convert these inches into feet. The reason why, when you multiply length times width times height, it's a lot easier to multiply these smaller numbers than it is to multiply these larger numbers. So that's why I want to do my answer in feet. So if I want to do my answer in feet, do I need to do anything with Steve's box? No, Steve's box does not need to be messed with because it's already in feet. Now, Tom's box is written in inches, so I do need to convert Tom's box to inches, remembering that 1 foot is equal to 12 inches. Now, the good news is most of you have your multiplication chart, so we're going to go ahead and look at our multiplication chart and figure out our multiples of 12. So, what is 60 inches? How many groups of 12 are there in 60 inches? 60 divided by 12 is what number? We're going to take 60 and divide it by 12, and that equals, I believe, that equals 5. So this is 5 feet. So now we've got 5 feet. We're going to kind of just put it across through that so we don't mess with that. What is 84 divided by 12? That's right. 84 divided by 12 is 7. And then what is 24 divided by 12? 24 divided by 12 is 2 feet. So now, when we find our volume for Steve's box, we're going to multiply 8 times 4 times 2. So Steve equals 8 times 4 times 2. Well, 8 times 4 is 32. 32 times 2 is 64 feet. And then remember, it's cubed because it's volume. So you need that tiny little 3 there. That means that it's cubed, and this is the volume. Then we're going to figure out what is Tom's box. Tom's box is equal to 5 times 7 times 2. 5 times 7 times 2. Well, 5 times 7 is 35. 35 times 2 is 70. And it's also feet cubed. So as you can see, we who's builds a box with a greater volume, Steve or Tom? Whose has a greater volume? This one is 64 feet cubed, and this one is 70 feet cubed. So that's right. Tom's box is greater in volume. And then how much greater is the volume? What is 70 minus 64? That is 8. So it is 8 feet, 8 cubic feet larger. So that's how you solve this. Now, If you were doing this in inches, you would be up in the tens of thousands. So sometimes you need to look and decide which unit is just going to be the best to work with. And in this case, because 12 went evenly into 60, 84, and 24, it just made sense to change this into feet and then work with smaller numbers. I promise you it won't always be that beautiful, but in this case it was. Hi guys, I realized when I went through and did this problem that I actually told you that 70 minus 64 was 8. And so the answer, and that's why we got the wrong answer. So 70 minus 64 is not 8, it is in fact 6. So the answer to this problem is 6, not 8. All right, let's look at number 7. Number 7 says this: a tree in Kenji's backyard is 6 7/10 meters tall. A tree in Chow's backyard, in Cho's backyard, is 730 centimeters tall. Which tree is taller? How much taller? Show your work. So, as always, what's the first thing we do? We're going to choose our unit. Now, since I chose to go to the larger unit in number 6, I'm going to go ahead and choose to go to the smaller unit in number 7. So what is the smaller unit, a meter or a centimeter? That's right, a centimeter. So I'm going to go ahead and turn both of these units into centimeters. So Kenji's, so we know that Cho's backyard the tree is already 730 centimeter. So we don't need to worry about doing anything with Cho because his is 730 centimeters. But we definitely need to figure out what Kenji's is. So Kenji's right now is 6 7/10 of a meter tall. So if we have 6 7/10 of a meter tall, and we need to convert that to centimeters, we do need to figure out how many centimeters is 1 meter. So 1 meter is equal to, let me get out my little cheat sheet. 1 meter is equal to 100 centimeters. So 1 meter is equal to 100 centimeters. So if I'm going from a meter to a centimeter, am I going to multiply or divide? That's right, I'm going to multiply. Whenever I go from a larger unit to a smaller unit, I multiply. So I'm going to multiply 6 7/10 meters times the number of meters, the number of centimeters in 1 meter to get my total number of centimeters. So I'm going to just move this 6 7/10 over. I have 2 zeros. I'm moving my decimal over 2 places. And so we know that Kenji's tree is 670 centimeters. So what is the question we're trying to solve? Which tree is taller? Well, looking here, we can see that Cho's tree is taller. So Cho's tree is taller. How much taller is it? That's the second question we're answering. Well, if we take 730 and we subtract 670, 0 minus 0 is 0, regroup, 13 minus 7 is 6, 6 minus 6 is 0. So it is 60 centimeters taller. So not that difficult. It's just a matter of making sure you choose your unit. And then the good news is once you choose your unit, you don't need to change both of them. You only need to change the one that's not in the unit that you want to use. So it's just important to always remember to choose your unit first. And then once you choose your unit, the one that stays the same, you can just leave it because it's already centimeters. And then you can convert this 6, in our case, this 6 7/10 meter, and convert it to centimeters to finish the problem. Now, number 8, it actually has 3 correct answers. So we're going to go through and figure out what those 3 correct answers are. So A rectangular coffee table is 1 2/3 yard long, so 1 2/3 yards long and 2 feet wide. Which of the following show the perimeter of the tabletop? So remember that perimeter is when we add all four sides together. So the perimeter equals 2L, meaning 2 of the lengths plus 2 of the widths. Or you might say length plus, so length plus width plus width. Okay, so we're going to add all four sides. So first thing we need to do is we're going to go ahead, and in this case, I am going to tell you we're going to have to do it both ways. So it doesn't really matter which way we do first. But let's go ahead and we're going to go to feet first. We're going to go to feet first. So we already know that this side over here is 2 feet, and that means that this side over here is also 2 feet. Now, these two sides are both 1 2/3 of a yard, and this is over here 1 2/3 of a yard. Okay, let me put in the Y. There we go. There we go. Now, let's convert these 1 2/3 of a yard into feet. So when we do that, if we're going 1 2/3, we need to change that into a into an improper fraction. So 3 times 1 is 3, and then 3 plus 2 is 5. So 5/3 is this improper fraction, and then we're going to multiply 5/3 times how many feet there are in 1 yard, which is 3. And then I'll do 3 over 1. So 5/3, that's going to be 15/3 because 5 times 3 is 15, 3 times 1 is 3. And then 15 divided by 3 equals 5. So we know that this side here is the same as 5 feet. And this side here is the same as 5 feet. Now, when we figure out the perimeter, we're going to add 2 plus 5 is 7. 7 plus 2 is 9. 9 plus 5 is 14. Do we see that over there? Yes, we do. So we're going to go ahead and fill in this 14 feet. Now, I'm going to go back because I'm going to, I'll highlight it because that might make it a little bit easier. So the pink is going to be feet. And then the yellow will be yards because I want to keep track of our yards. So we've converted our yards here to feet, but now we need to convert this 2 into yards. So remember, if we're converting from a smaller unit to a larger unit, we need to divide. So we're going to divide 2 feet divided by the number of feet in 1 yard, which is 3. So 2 divided by 3, we can rewrite that as a fraction of 2/3. So 2 feet is also the same as 2/3 of a yard. 2/3 of a yard. Do you see how we got that? So we did 2 feet divided by 3 feet in 1 yard equals 2/3 of a yard. Now I'm going to highlight that in yellow just so that we can make sure that we're adding just the yellows when we go around. So we're going to add, I'm running out of space to write. I'm going to go ahead and put it on this paper here so that we have room. So we're going to add 1 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 1 2/3 plus 2/3. So we have 1 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 1 2/3. That's a lot of 1 2/3. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just add all of my numerators first. So 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 8. And then remember, when we add fractions, our denominator stays the same, and then we have 2 wholes. But then we need to recognize that the 8 can be divided by 3, so we can break 8/3 up into 3/3 plus 3/3 plus 2/3. Because we basically, this 8/3 is the same as 1 whole, like 2 wholes plus 2/3. So our total answer is 4 2/3. Whew, that was a beast. All right, do we have that choice? Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Now, as I promised you earlier, one more answer is correct. I want us to take this 4 2/3 and change it back into an improper fraction. So if we were going to change this into an improper fraction, 4 times 3 is 12. 12 plus 2 is 14. And then remember, our denominator stays the same. So 4 2/3 is the same as 14/3. Is that one of our choices? Yes, it is. So in order to do this problem, you definitely would have had to do some legwork. So luckily, you guys stuck with me and we did that problem. But it took some effort, but guess what? We did it. So with that, you're going to go ahead and do, since your brain is on fire, the next pages 545 and 546 on your own. As always, if you have any questions, you can email your teacher. See you tomorrow.